Hello, it's Celine again. I have another document for you. It's August 27th and it's freaking hot. This is dated April 1st, 2020, and I just got done watching a video by Richie from Boston about the National Guard being trained to detain people. And this is a document from the United Nations, police planning during a COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm just going to read some little excerpts. It won't be as long as the Public Health Act. General considerations. This is from the United Nations website. I'll leave a link. It's a PDF. Look for outside resources and promising approaches in other departments. Internet search engines also can be useful in finding the most up-to-date information and in identifying police and other law enforcement agencies that have developed plans for this CV. A key part of the jurisdiction-wide planning for this pandemic is to identify the priority roles that only police or other law enforcement agencies can take and to find alternatives to police assistance where possible. So it looks like the UN, this is actually UNPOL, UNPOL, United Nations Police. So it looks like they're going to be first assisting the police, but I don't think our police will be hanging around very long, actually, and I'll read another document about that. Use existing plans and incorporate only the new components that are needed during a COVID pandemic. Individual modules cover such topics as evacuation of urban areas or how mortuaries should plan to handle mass fatalities. Nice. External measures. Reach out. Jurisdiction-wide planning efforts will need to involve public health and medical officials who in turn will be able to help the police and other law enforcement agencies educate themselves and develop their own plans. Build on existing relationships. Police officials must identify local subject matter experts such as public health or medical officials with whom the police agency interacts on a routine basis, either in-house medical professionals or external public health officials as early as possible in the planning process. Identify relevant public health laws and authorities. Police agency personnel need to become familiar with the relevant public health laws governing any response to a pandemic, such as the laws that specify who has the authority to declare a public health emergency, and any laws that give policing agencies special powers during this time. That would be our director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. A good understanding of the role of police and other law enforcement in enforcing public health orders will help policing agencies know what will be expected of them in enforcing quarantines and other sensitive matters, whatever those are. Include other local criminal justice entities in the planning efforts. Recognize that the functioning of the other components of the judicial justice system, such as courts, correctional agencies, and other law enforcement agencies, will likely be impaired during the pandemic. Develop a public communication strategy in advance. Work with public health officials to develop messages and strategies for communicating risks to the community. Communications should include accurate and timely information. It should follow reasonable risk communication guidelines that will reduce unnecessary fear and panic, as well as warranted but opportunistic blame for the pandemic being directed at the more vulnerable sections of society. Elderly, children, I don't know what that means. Poor messages should be very clear in explaining the threat, providing guidance on what the public should do in the event of an emergency, and emphasizing the importance and direct benefit to the community and its healthy system of voluntary compliance with public health orders, such as self-quarantine and social distancing measures that are designed to prevent the congregation of people in movie theaters, churches, nightclubs, or other confined spaces where contagion is likely. It may be beneficial for the police agency to communicate in concrete terms on their ongoing enforcement activities, etc., on number of checkpoints established, people stopped, fines issued, and more serious charges invoked, etc., to further encourage compliance. Some agencies recommend additional training for key spokespersons on the issue. Develop strategies for informing the public about the suspension of non-critical police and other law enforcement duties. Noting the precautionary measures recommended by the WHO, and given that national police and other law enforcement agencies will need to continue to address not only matters of public safety, but also those related to public health concerns before, during, and after the pandemic, police and other law enforcement entities, their relevant ministries, and judicial authorities therefore should consider whether it is possible to limit arrests and/or detentions temporarily to only those offenses which pose an immediate threat to the community in order to reduce pressure on places of detention and prisons during this period. At the same time, they should expect likely to see an increase in the calls for service owing to the conditions surrounding the response to this pandemic. Domestic violence / SGBV, I don't know what that means, inter-community violence, police relationship with the communities impacted by the enforcement of the CV measures, particularly related to enforcing confinement policies and public order management while maintaining respect for human rights. It's kind of an oxymoron. Prejudice and violence against those suspected of having the CV, as well as foreigners, specific minorities, refugees, and other newly vulnerable groups. Trafficking and smuggling of people. Counterfeiting of medicines and medical goods. And civil unrest focused at medical treatment centers, food outlets and distribution centers, warehouses contain and suspected to contain in-demand items and other critical infrastructure. Identify the special skills required to carry out the critical department functions, especially tasks carried out by small, highly specialized units, and then identify other personnel or volunteers in the department who possess these skills or could be trained in them. Officials need to consider how to supplement the department's workforce, for example, by using pre-existing network of volunteers. I don't know, these things keep talking about volunteers. I don't know who those people will be. Begin agency education efforts as soon as possible. Many educational resources already developed by national health agencies may be easily incorporated into your agency's educational efforts. Okay. And then we have annexes. Annex 1. The CV-19 potential criminal threats. The following are some areas most likely to see an increase in the calls for service owing to the conditions surrounding the response to this pandemic. And this is the same thing. Domestic violence, SGBV, inter-community violence, police relationship with the communities impacted by the enforcement of these measures, prejudice and violence against those suspected of having this thing that doesn't exist, as well as foreigners, specific minorities, refugees, and other newly vulnerable groups, etc. And you can contact Sofiane.Baca at UNDP.org if you want. She is the Policy Specialist, Rule of Law, Security and Human Rights Team for Sustainable Peace and Development Crisis Bureau. SOFIENE.BACHA at UNDP.org. And Andrew Carpenter, Chief, Strategy, Policy and Development Section, Police Division, Department of Peace Operations, at carpentera@un.org. Annex 2, Preventing Exposure. At the entrance, a temperature checkpoint set up by the mission should be used by both officers and visitors. We know about that. There's an Annex 3, operational procedure to follow when showing visitors to police premises. I guess that's the detainment. There were detainment camps or something. UNPOL C0vid operational guidelines. Data suggests that symptoms may appear in as few as 2 days or as long as 14 days after exposure to the virus that causes this thing that doesn't really do that. Purpose. Host governments will also progressively start issuing more and more restrictions, and it's important to ensure compliance with host state issuances concerning not only restrictions of movements and enforcement, but also sanitary. UNPOL is likely to get more buy-in from local population as well as the host state if they comply with WHO compliant host state decrees issuances. As part of the readiness response of the UN Medical Directors COVID-19 outbreak, 3-phase response activation system head of police component HOPC should have developed, updated, and tested their business continuity plan that will allow performance of critical functions with reduced number of personnel, ensure that UNPOLs identified as high-risk populations are trained on the proper use and disposal of masks and other PPE used, and ensure access and availability of necessary PPE for UN personnel. Preventing exposure. It is intended to provide a framework to which UNPOL officers can add preventive measures specific to their working environment. All disposable products should as a practice be disposed of responsibly after use, including in line with issuances by the local health authorities' instructions of the UN Medical Division. So they got this all planned out. So, okay, this isn't very long. Desk operations. Now, in light of the virus and its effects on the health of the host state society, the 4 questions listed below are additional screening measures to help identify potential health concerns and should be asked by those personnel answering calls for service anytime UNPOL officers will be responding to a given location. A. Have you traveled out of the country territory within the last 21 days? B. Have you had contact with anyone known to be out of the country territory within the last 21 days? C. Do you have a cough, shortness of breath, or fever over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, or higher, flu-like symptoms? D. Have you had contact with anyone with a cough, shortness of breath, or fever of same or higher flu-like symptoms in the last 72 hours? If they answer yes to any of the above questions or they are symptomatic, it should be noted in the narrative of the call for service and advise responding UNPOL officers to do the appropriate personal protective equipment. N95 mask, which you can't breathe oxygen through, protective eyewear, and latex gloves. So, and these questions were asked at the naturopath my boyfriend just went to. They asked him those same questions. Really weird. Patrolling. UNPOL personnel shall continue to patrol and interact with their host state counterparts and members of the host state community. Demonstrations crowd control. If requested, UNPOL personnel shall continue to assist the host state police and other law enforcement personnel in the policing of assemblies only if a distance of at least 2 meters, 6 feet for physical distancing can be maintained and protective equipment is made available to UNPOL personnel. Electoral assistance. I guess we're supposed to pay for that equipment too, I'm guessing. Electoral assistance. If requested, UNPOL personnel shall continue to assist the host state police and other law enforcement personnel in ensuring the safety and integrity of electoral processes only if a distance of at least 2 meters, 6 feet for physical distancing can be maintained and protective equipment is made available to UNPOL personnel. Detaining host state persons. This is my favorite part. Until further notice, and with the exception of the capital P, small o, capital C camps run by the United Nations, UNPOL officers shall refrain from detaining host state persons and placing them in the UN detention facilities. So this document hasn't changed last time I checked it a couple days ago. So right now, UNPOL officers are standing down to detain anyone in host states. The POC camps, I'm guessing, are the FEMA camps, which they're actually UN camps. If, as a result of the of the UNPOL intervention, a detention is warranted, relevant information shall be shared with the host state authorities for their follow-up. In the POC camps, prisoners of the CV camps, UNPOL officers with protective equipment shall continue to exercise their public safety duties and, if necessary, detain persons if warranted and in accordance with the directive on the use of force and mandate. In such cases, UNPOL personnel detaining host state persons must ask the transporting officer if all or any of those persons meets any of the above listed criteria in paragraph 20A through D prior to allowing them into a UN detention facility. If the criteria are met, immediately notify mission medical staff who will then respond to medically assess those being detained. Mission medical staff can determine if the new detainee is acceptable to proceed through the intake process or if measures should be taken to transport the person to a UN or non-UN medical facility for further care and or evaluation. Then who are these people that they're detaining then? If mission medical staff determines detainee should be transported to a UN detention facility, a surgical mask must be placed on the detainee and notifications made to the UN detention facility of the pending transport. Investigative interview procedures. Investigative interviews should be conducted with due regard for UNPOL officer safety. Whenever possible, UNPOL officers should attempt to contact the individual by phone and conduct their interviews by phone. I mean, it sounds to me like everybody's doing what the United Nations wants them to do anyway. Like the questions that were asked my boyfriend on the phone by the naturopath were the same questions here, and the contact tracing is being done by the local public health department in McDonough County, Illinois here, and I've seen where the National Guard is also doing the same thing. So it seems to me that everyone kind of by the United Nations is being regarded as an agent of the United Nations. Does it not? I don't know. Actions to take after detection of first suspect confirmed case amongst UNPOL dependents. Important as soon as CV-19 is suspected, even prior to confirmation. Ensure isolation of the person. Contact tracing should occur once CV is confirmed. Maintain close liaison with local health authorities and WHO country office. Be ready to implement their instructions on lab testing, case management, and contact tracing. The World Health Organization country office. So I guess the World Health Organization is going to have offices in these different countries. So like maybe the local health department, I'm guessing. You can communicate internally to UN staff about the case, and there's a contact DOSDH-MOSH-public-health@un.org for advice if required. Vehicle decontamination procedures. If a UNPOL vehicle requires decontamination, the following procedures apply. The affected vehicle should be transported to a designated parking place, locked, secured, quarantined, and marked contaminated on the windscreen. This goes right along with the Public Health Act. And then there's behavioral health, and there's a couple other emails and phone numbers here that you can call for stress counselors. These are stress counselors, UN stress counselors. Anne Marie MARIE.SERRANOBANQUET@UN.org, and somebody I can't pronounce, HEWAGEM@UN.org. And staff stress counselors in the field should refer to this novel CV psychosocial contingency plan preparation guideline. I haven't looked that up. And then we have an Annex 1, which is, these are pretty much the same thing as the other one. And we have a contact tracing. It looks like, I guess this is a contact tracing form. UNPOL C0vid exposure report form. So, get that. And the Annex 4, and this is the same, UNPOL C0vid potential criminal threats. The following are some areas most likely to see an increase in the calls for service owing to the conditions surrounding this response to CV pandemic, domestic violence, the SGBEV, inter-community violence, police relationship with the communities impacted by the enforcement of the CV measures, and prejudice and violence against those suspected of having CV-19 as well as foreigners, specific minorities, refugees, and other newly vulnerable groups, etc. So there you have it. I will find the link to this document, and so there, that's the deal is the United Nations will be coming into these host states to assist, or they could be the National Guard could be UN agents as well, than the military. So that's another possibility. But I highly suspect that they will be, they'll have the, as much as can be allowed, and if there's no mutiny, which there should be mutiny because this is unconstitutional. So anybody that's in military and the National Guard, you should not be arresting or detaining any U.S. citizens. This is against the Constitution. You cannot suspend the Constitution for any reason ever. So if they tell you tell you that because of there's an emergency executive order that the Constitution, U.S. Constitution is suspended, they're lying to you. So they're using you. And I guess I will just read this. This is the Morgenthau Plan. Savage in its implication, the Morgenthau Plan entailed, among other things, the denial of medicines and medical care to ordinary German citizens. This is after World War II. And I'm not going to get into the truth about World War II, but let's just say there would be a high concentration of Ashkenazi Jews that now live in Palestine. So there were more actually Germans that died in World War II than Jews. I'm sorry. That's just the truth of the matter. I'm not going to get into the details in this video. The denial of medicines and medical care to ordinary German citizens. This is after post-World War II. The dismantling or destruction of Germany's factories and industrial plants, and the forced unemployment of most of Germany's workers, driving millions of German families from their homes and the transfer of these homes to Jews. The theft of all Germany and its people's valuable assets, the starvation of tens of millions, and whatever food that was available being sent to neighboring countries like France and Poland, the incarceration of the members of all of Germany's former armed forces in concentration slave labor camps in Russia and other countries where they would be used for slave labor until they died, and death by freezing of millions with all German oil, coal, and other energy transferred to other countries. So Germany was decimated after World War I and after World War II by the same Rothschild banks that started the United Nations, started the League of Nations, controlled both sides, the communists and the Nazis during World War I, controlling Antifa, BLM, and what is that? Not effing around crew or whatever that is. They're financing BLM. They're financing Antifa. The police are standing down. I've seen in my town, there'll be 5 cops that pull over somebody that's black. I was told by a cop in my town too that I wasn't the right race or gender to be targeted. So he just told me that they target black men in my town. So the police have been set up. You've been instructed. It sounds to me like you have gotten instructions or orders, at least some of you, a faction of you, to target black or minority men, black men in particular, and probably and Hispanic men, and now you're paying for it. Now you're paying for it. Now they've set you up. Now you're paying for it. And now you're being told to stand down by your mayors, I guess, by your mayors. So, I can watch 5 cops pull over somebody, black students or whatever at Western Illinois University and take their headlights apart and do all this stuff. But I'm just guessing that if Antifa rolls into town, that the same police department is going to stand down. In fact, they told somebody recently, I just heard, that they weren't going to do anything about a stolen bike or something because it's the new norm. The sheriff's department is guarding the hospital, which is a corporate hospital. That's not a state hospital. So what the hell is the sheriff's department that's supposed to be, our protecting us, guarding a corporate hospital? What is that about? Anyway, one more time, I'm going to read this just to tell you what they did to the soldiers in the Nazis that were Germans. There was 150,000 Jewish troops, the Nazi troops, by the way. 150,000. So it was about the Jews, but it wasn't about the Jews. It was about the Jews, but it was about getting them to Palestine in order to create the state of Israel, which was done immediately post World War II. That's what that was all about. The incarceration of the members of all of Germany's former armed forces in concentration and slave labor camps in Russia and other countries where they would be used for slave labor until they died. So just keep that in mind. That's the Morgenthau Plan. I don't know much about it. It was in this book, Tex Marr's book. I'm not going to be able to do Tex Marr's book. Can you see it? Eye-opening revelations and forbidden knowledge about Israel, the Jews, Zionism, and the Rothschilds' conspiracy of the six-pointed star. So that was in his book. I would suggest reading any of his books and learn what the truth is and who your enemy really are. Because right now, if you hadn't noticed, this faction, these Phoenicians, or whatever you want to call them, are at war with the Gentiles. There's a war against the Gentiles. It has started in the United States. Just because it's not happening in your town yet doesn't mean that it's not going on. You can look around at Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is close to me. It started, and I imagine these aren't just organic. You don't just write Black Lives Matter in great big block letters that are perfectly, and these Proud Boys, KKK. Oh, this is like the coup in Iran. And if you don't know about the coup in Iran, the Mossadegh and the Shah protesters were both paid. They were hungry and they were paid. And so both parts were paid operatives. So not everybody that's involved in Black Lives Matter is getting paid. Not everybody's in Antifa, although probably most of them are getting paid. And they're probably the people possibly that they released from these prisons or jails or whatever they released them from, with conditions that they do this. So a bunch of whatever psychopaths and whatever they are, I don't even know, they're crazy. And homeless people, they're hungry. You're getting paid $200 a day to go loot, and then you get to keep the booty on top of it. And not everybody that's doing it is getting paid, but these police, looks to me like the police are arresting them, like in New York and wherever else. New York's the one that stands out in my mind. They arrest these looters and rioters, and then the next thing you know, they're being released, and they don't understand why. Nobody understands why. And the police departments earlier in this whole thing that we're going through right now, I saw police chiefs that were were wanting to get to the bottom of this. Like, who are these people? Who are these people? So I think Richie from Boston just had posted an article that Antifa and BLM were George Soros and company had financed them $100 million. So, and the United Nations came out and said they were backing Antifa, if that tells you anything. They're just terrorist organizations. So anyway, I think I'll end it there, and I'll try to be back with another document soon. Bye.